Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this Sphinx session, SphinxConnect 2021 Unity. I am Ed Yim. I am calling from New York, and I am the Chief Content Officer of WQXR 105.9 classical music in New York. But I spent many, many decades in the orchestra world, and I'm honored to be joined by three amazing individuals who I've had the pleasure to get to know over the past few weeks. Today, we're going to shine a light on some of the work these three wonderful people have been doing to create projects and initiatives that bring about change. We hope that it will be an inspiration to young people and young people at heart who want to change in the world, and focus on the how as well as the what. So we'll start with introductions. I'll ask each of our panelists to briefly talk about their signature projects or projects that they've been involved with, and then we'll talk about how they went about getting these projects off the ground and running. And then we'll leave some time for questions and answers at the end from all of you. Please use the Q&A button in your browser, and the wonderful Sphinx team will be sending those questions our way. So you have the biographies of all of us on the website. You can go back later and check those out. But I will just ask each of my colleagues to introduce themselves, identify themselves by name, and just kind of quick identifier about institution or job or whatever. And then you can go read about their incredible and many accomplishments later in the biography, and we won't take up that valuable time right here. So I'm going to ask Samantha to go first and introduce herself, and then hand it off to one of our colleagues. Samantha.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Williams. I am a first-year specialist student at the University of Michigan in voice performance. I work with Excel, the lab there for entrepreneurship, leadership, and career services. And I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you more about art citizens and art activism. Clifton, would you like to go next?
Yeah, of course. I'm Clifton Boyd. I'm a music theorist, currently pursuing a PhD at Yale University. I study how music theory intersects with issues of social justice, primarily in American popular music. And I'm also the founder of Project Spectrum, a graduate student-led coalition working to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in music academia. I'll talk more about that soon. And yeah, I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all and to talk about how young people can be the change that we want to see in our communities, and that if we all do our bit in our own communities, it's really going to be great for helping us all as a collective. And then Ian.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you. My name is Dr. Ian Saunders. I play the bass. As a performer, I'm probably best known for being a diversity fellow with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. I am also now the assistant dean of artistic and social change at the Longy School of Music of Bard College, and I'm eager to talk about my work with them and also get a chance to speak with these wonderful colleagues as well.
Thank you all. Ian, I think I mentioned to you when we were getting to know each other that I was a very bad piano student at Longy in my student days. So let's talk briefly about the why, not like the why, but the why. Clifton, why is this conversation important right now? Just a couple of thoughts before we get into the projects.
Yes. So I touched on it towards the end of my introduction, but I really think that it's great to think about how young people, and in particular in my positionality as a student, how we can create the change that we want to see. Because I think too often in academia, and I'm sure also in other contexts, there's this feeling that one needs to be older, one needs to have more seniority in order to be able to sign off on this, or to even have a trustworthy opinion on that. And I think in a lot of cases, young people have different conceptions of things that can really shake up how institutions work. And it may be a bit intimidating or daunting at the beginning to know about how to go about the project, but I think that's what's also a very exciting part of this discussion we're going to have. We talk about the what, and then also the how in terms of how we've gotten these projects off the ground. Yeah.
That's great. So what I hear you saying, which I totally 100% agree with, is that it's never too early to get involved and to start to affect the change that you want to see. You don't have to wait necessarily.
Exactly.
Ian, what about you? What's the why for you about agreeing to be a part of this panel?
Yeah, for the why, there's been a lot of talk about how the arts can be a change agent, right? And I think that's important. If we just talk about a basic human connection, what we're all sort of experiencing is a way that, we all love, we all live, and we all struggle in various different ways, right? And art is an interface for that. And so art gives voice to these experiences that we go through. And so what we're basically asking for when we address institutions and when we're talking about programming art, is let's not curate these experiences and voices out of the world, right? Let's make sure that these are heard in the first place and make sure that they have that space. We don't want to try to contextualize history by only having a select experience only available. So that's the why we're here.
Excellent. Thank you. And Samantha, what's the why for you?
Absolutely. Similarly to what Ian was saying, I think that there's a growing need for art citizens, and artist citizens is a conversation that I'm hearing more and more amongst our generation. I think that particularly in classical music, it's often kind of been defined in this exclusionary and rather privileged way that the purpose of classical music is to reflect beauty, to preserve tradition, to kind of be this peaceful escape from the world. And that's just simply not every artist's what every artist needs from music and why they enter the world as an artist. And so I think as more and more artists with diverse experiences and identities are entering the classical music space, it takes people who want to identify as art citizens to push classical music to expand their definition to include things like the purpose of classical music is to educate, to convince, to unsettle, to reflect the trauma and the evil in this world. And I think that that's something that is just so important to have conversation around.
I think you get agreement from everyone around this virtual table that that's true, Samantha. Before we move on to talking about projects, I just want to open up a question, though, that's implicit in that, which is that it's not either or, is it? It's yes and, that there is beauty and art for art's sake, but also that there is this other area that is equally important, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I hope, yes, I hope that that is what came across. I think that it's just about expanding the definition. I think that there should be a place for art that is beauty. I mean, don't we all love that? And we all do need a break from really traumatic days. I know that in my personal experience with quarantine, I needed days where I could just watch something that was benign and not talking about anything that forced me to engage deeply. But there also needs to be art that can reflect what's going on. And I think that other forms of art and other forms of music are more open to that than classical music has traditionally been. So I just think it's taken us a little bit of to expand the definition.
Yeah, very good point. Great, let's get into it. Ian, tell us a little bit about your work at Longy and what you've started fairly recently. So what is it that you hope to do there, and what kind of change would you like to see through your platform in your new position there?
Yes, so I started very recently. Pray for me. I've been there for about 6 months. And one thing that I love about Longy, we have a lot of students who come to Longy who are concerned with how can I be a citizen artist, right? They want to know, how do you move from the gesture of D&I, community engagement, to the action, which is an important thing. And that's not necessarily something that's inherent in learning concertos and etudes and repertoire. At the risk of sounding shady, that's not what it's meant to do, right? And so what I love is just this aspect of the Catalyst curriculum that we came up with. Now, I was not part of the inception or the beginning of it, but what is tremendous about it is its ability to be amenable and adaptive to the students that we have there, and also the community as well, which allows me to bring a lot of experience from working in the community as well to this sort of endeavor. For myself, and maybe for a lot of you out there as well, we're familiar with that idea of like the pipeline, right? And we're probably familiar with the idea of, being in the pipeline where you have people, artists, come into the community, and there's sort of a demand for an appreciation of what they're bringing, but no one ever actually asks you, what do you value and what do you appreciate in the first place? And so we want to make sure that we don't do that. We want to make sure that it's always clear that when we're out in the community doing art, it is not a service, it's a partnership. And in order for it to be a partnership, there has to be some reciprocity there. And so we try to make sure that we provide those tools to do that. I mean, one of the biggest things that we want to do with our curriculum, we have courses such as teaching artistry and music and civic engagement, right? These are courses that actually have our students out in the community, working with community partners who are the experts in their community to develop partnership goals in the first place, right? As opposed to just saying, hey, I'm going to come and I'm going to play Beethoven Opus 131. There's nothing wrong with that. But maybe at that particular moment, Beethoven Opus 131 doesn't exactly speak to the things that I'm experiencing in my life at that particular moment. So that's the reason why we try to encourage our students to be out in that community, and we give them those tools through something like teaching artistry and music and civic engagement. And then along with a lot of other things such as musician's portfolio and entrepreneurship, we show how to actually put those things into practice and then actually go out and take part. So because we do things like that, that's why we actually have students playing at Mount Auburn, playing for people in transition care, right? Because these are also still members in the community, right? Community doesn't mean just children. Community doesn't mean like not focusing on adults because they're a lost cause, right? Like these are all members of the community that have specific needs that we can address. So we can move from this idea once again from music being a service, right, to an actual partnership. So that's something that I'm very excited to work with, because as I said before, that this consciousness, these voices have always been in the world, right? There have always been experiences. So we can't feign not knowing when they've always been there. There's a difference between not knowing and not listening. So in order to be a citizen artist, what it entails is actually being in the community, developing that. And as I said before, with the Catalyst curriculum, is adaptive and amenable. Perfection is the enemy to a good plan, right? Sure, you can do something and it's not as effective as you want to, but that's the great thing about the curriculum. And hopefully I can impart some wisdom, which is developing something that you can learn from and then using that to develop something better in the next part. And so I think that's what we're trying to achieve. No, that's what we're trying to achieve at Longy, and I'm proud to be a part of that work and bring my expertise on that level.
And Ian, you've had some experience in this music as partnership model from your time as a Cincinnati Symphony Fellow, right? Is that experience informing the way that you are approaching this Catalyst curriculum at Longy?
Yeah, very much so. So my time as a fellow, where I would sort of go out into the communities as well, I did a lot of work with, for example, we would do, Cincinnati has its own sort of classical roots concerts, right? And one big thing that from working in the community that I thought was important to sort of work with and convey and work with Cincinnati with was this idea of like making sure that we didn't turn, because I'm talking about a gospel choir, so I'm mostly talking about Black folk, to making sure that their experiences in the concert night wasn't turned into a novelty, right? Because people are really aware of that. So it's bringing experiences like that, and also bringing experience. I did a lot of work in the Bahamas as well, on similar work this way. So just being in the community, engaging, making sure you're aware, and just being attentive. Ultimately, what we're all talking about when we're talking about arts, when we're talking about DE&I work, it's just human engagement in the first place, and just always making sure we bring it to that level and never losing sight of that. Everything else is a means to that end, but we don't want to get caught up in the means and the technique. I mean, I don't think that metaphor is lost on anyone here as a musician, right? Technique is a means to an end, supposing you have an end.
Yeah. Before we segue to Samantha, because I think some of the things that she's been working on relate very much directly to the sort of curriculum that you're talking about. Just a very quick question. what do you estimate eventually or currently, like what portion of a Longy student's time will be kind of focused on this catalyst curriculum as opposed to what we more traditionally think of conservatory training? Like how much time is a student able to engage in these tools?
Uh, so the Catalyst curriculum is inherent to the mission of Longy. So they're pretty much coming there in the first place, and that's part of their entire thing. So it's not I'm going to do Brahms on Monday, and then I'm going to go work with Black people on Tuesday. Like that is all related to each other. So the whole time that they're there engaging with Longy and engaging with the Catalyst curriculum, it is inherent in their day-to-day work.
That's awesome. So it's a lens through which they do everything that they do at Longy.
Correct.
Awesome. That's great. Samantha, over to you. I know that you're working on some stuff at the University of Michigan that sounds sort of related to what Ian is doing at Longy, and you've been involved in some projects in your past that have been really great too. Tell us a little bit about that and what you were hoping to do with those projects.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ed. And yes, Ian, as I hear you talk about your project, I'm like, wow, that's where I hope to be in 5 years. So yes, absolutely. Lots of overlap. I think that my work coming in as an arts activist, I've learned so much of it has been just about learning how to bring my full self and my identity as a Black female into the classical music space. I think that often we think a lot about how our external impact as art activists might be, but I've learned, at least for myself, it's definitely about what happens internally first. I think my experience has really been a lot about growth and learning how to bring myself into each space. I know that I grew up feeling that I had to leave my Blackness at the door in classical music. I learned how to code switch very young. I learned that we talked about Mozart in my lessons, and I talked about gospel at church, and there wasn't any intersection of the two. And I think it wasn't until I was in college and I was told that the show I wanted to work on in musical theater didn't align with the theater company's values because it was too political, that I first had to really think about why I was in the arts and what being a Black artist was going to mean to me. And so that experience kind of pushed me into realizing that it wasn't enough for me personally to only be a part of art that was entertaining and that's light, and that I did desire to be a part of art that reflected my world. And things related to my experience. So that propelled me to create Black Stage, which is a Black theater company that is focused on telling Black stories and nurturing Black artists. For our first production, we worked on Ragtime, which was in response to President Trump's election and dealing with a lot of questions around xenophobia, the American dream, how is there a correct way to protest, and what is that? How do we have conversations around this? And so that was a really exciting project. I think for me, that was kind of my first step into it. And that pushed me to go to the University of Michigan, where I knew that they had a history of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly around Black singers in classical music. But even there in my first year, I found it was really difficult to bring my full self to the spaces outside of, meetings with the Black faculty and discussions with my Black colleagues. It took me a little bit to learn how to kind of fully embody that. I had to really explore if I was ready and willing to allow my presence itself to be political. If I actually wanted to identify as an arts activist, even on days when I was tired or I was really scared of a teacher and just wanted to not bring any attention to myself. And so I think that once I finally made that commitment, I've had so much great feedback and so much great reactions, particularly at the University of Michigan, just being connected to so many faculty and mentors who really helped me to get going on goals. So as a result of all of that, I have started Typecast, which is anti-racist and DEI in the arts blog series. It's all focused on exploring race and casting, questions like whether or not we should be canceling Kanye if we haven't canceled Wagner, lots of conversations and ways that I find of kind of bringing the arts to more diverse audiences and making it more accessible, particularly classical music. I also, related to Ian, am currently working on a proposal for Art Impacts, which would be an arts activism, community engagement, and social change institute at the University of Michigan. It's in its very, very, very early stages. I'm just in discussions with faculty, the student advisory committee, and working on getting the first mock-up curriculum. But I just think that everything Ian said is absolutely so applicable across the board, that we really have to dispel that idea that the pipeline is not about you as an artist and not about your interests and the things that make you you, but about fitting into someone else's standard for what a classical artist should look like and what they should care about.
Wow, amazing. I have so many questions for all of you, and we only have an hour, so I'm just going to go to the top one before we move to Clifton. But so Ragtime is one of my favorite musicals, Samantha. I love it, and I'm delighted that you were involved in a production of it. But you know, recently at Cincinnati Conservatory, the entering first year class in the musical theater program wrote a list of demands to the administration, and one of them said, one of the demands was, we don't want to perform pieces anymore about Black characters written by non-Black authors. And that would eliminate Ragtime from the opportunities that they would be available to. And, you know, in our own classical quote unquote world, you know, one can think about Porgy and Bess and the fact that it is a depiction of the Black experience by a white man. How do you feel about that in terms of authorship and interpretation and appropriation?
Absolutely. That is such an important and large question. So I will do my best to take a stab at it, but Clifton and Ian, if you disagree or have other things, please feel free to chime in. I think for myself, I think about this a lot because, again, there are productions like Ragtime. There are things that I find that I identify with, that I love, that I think are great pieces that I would love to dive into further as an artist and take to use to make a point to use. And I think that it, to me, just comes down to that a play or a story written by an identity other than one's own is an interpretation. So it is not, you know, Porgy and Bess is not a Black opera. It's Gershwin's interpretation of a Black opera. And in order for it to actually be a Black opera, there needs to be a Black writer. It needs to be people who have some claim to the identity of which they're writing about. And to me, that doesn't mean that we have to disqualify something just because it's someone else's interpretation. I think we need to acknowledge that it's an interpretation, but I think that we should hope to allow for people to have artistic teams and artistic people to have enough room to take it creatively where they think they can and to make an impact that way. I know I personally think with Porgy and Bess, I often wonder what would have happened if Gershwin, instead of stipulating that it had to be an all Black cast, had stipulated that it had to have a Black director and conductor, because, or even producer. I often think that a lot of the issues that come up with Porgy and Bess, where it's definitely a double-edged sword, would be better handled if the creative team identified as African American. I think the issue of casting would have sorted itself out. I think it would be different if people had a little more freedom to present themselves the way they want to be presented. And so I know when we did a production of Ragtime, we were very thoughtful to include Hillel, the Jewish Life Institute on campus, as a large acting part of our creative process, who worked with all of our actors. We reached out to a lot of different groups, and it was a very collaborative across community approach to this. And we tried to have a lot of discussions as a result of that. So
yeah, contextualization is important, right? As opposed to just assumption or appropriation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Clifton, you work in a slightly different area in terms of musical theory, and I feel like this has been in the news a lot, that we teach theory basically through the lens of dead white European-based, you know, composers. And why don't you tell us a little bit about Project Spectrum and what you hope to achieve with that in addressing that situation?
Definitely. I'll pull up my slides right now. But yes, it is wild. Who would have thought 2 years ago that music theory would be like in the national news for such terrible reasons? So I'm not going to get into it now because it would take too long, but you can just Google it if you're curious. So, but to talk about Project Spectrum, here we go. Okay.
Yep, we got it.
So thank you. So just as a reminder, I'm the founder of Project Spectrum, and it is a graduate student-led coalition working to increase DEI in music academia. And I founded the group back in 2017 with the help of several graduate student colleagues and faculty members across the country that I've met at conferences and things like that. And in terms of things that we have done since our founding in 2017, We have organized a national symposium, Diversifying Music Academia, Strengthening the Pipeline. This was supported by a Sphinx Empower Artist grant, and we're very fortunate to how Sphinx has supported us since our inception. It's really made a lot of our initiatives possible, and like we could do a lot more with thanks to their funding. The event itself explored why many people marginalized by their race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, disability, and/or class continue to have difficulty in finishing graduate degrees, attaining gainful employment, and receiving tenure within all fields of music studies. After that, we were fortunate enough to be invited to give keynote presentations at the annual meeting of the Music Theory Society for New York State. And this followed up on a lot of the themes that we talked about in the 2018 symposium. More recently, we had a virtual second national symposium, Diversifying Music Academia, Building the Coalition, once again supported by an Empower Artist grant. And this symposium highlighted the role of coalition in the promotion of systemic change in and around music studies. And then lately, like a different way of having an impact is that we've been having some publications happen. We published a colloquy recently in an academic journal in Current Musicology, and then we have some invited journal articles that are in the works and should be coming out sometime this summer or in the fall. And regarding the inspiration for Project Spectrum, you know, it's very fitting that I'm here at this Sphinx panel to talk about it, because Sphinx, you know, has been a part of my life since I want to say 2009. Even before, I think, attending the Sphinx Performance Academy in 2009, I'm from Michigan, so I would go to some of the Sphinx competition concerts. And so there were just like a lot of ways that I was seeing these great initiatives happening in the performance world and the classical music world, but I wasn't seeing them happen in music academia. And that was like a disconnect that was a big motivation for launching the project. There was also a very interesting turning point for me, which is that in 2016, November 2016, I attended a session at the American Musicological Society's annual meeting titled Race, Ethnicity, and the Profession. And at this session, you know, I had just finished my master's degree. I was starting my Ph.D. So I was like, you know, full stamped academic by that point. But it wasn't until then that I like looked in the room at this, you know, we were all talking about race, and I'm like, whoa, like, okay, now I'm just actually thinking about like how many white people there are in the society. And like, there's this room full of like, maybe like 200 people, and I could be one of like maybe 2 Black people in this room. And, you know, it was very telling to me. And the scholars of color, they had a lot of stories to share about like whether it was like their process of getting tenure or like dealing with departmental issues. Like they were having a hard time, and I'm like, is this what I signed up for? I didn't realize it, you know, at the moment. This was also like 4 days before Trump was elected. So, you know, it's just like a great mix of all these events happening. So the motivating
Clifton,
question.
I
Yes.
just wanted to say I really appreciate the way you denote
Oh,
the
yes, yes.
situation there.
Inspired by Colbert, definitely. And then, so the motivating question that I had was, what could I do to make the field a welcoming space for scholars like me, whether they be Black or other people of color or women or otherwise marginalized people? And how could music theory and music academia be a space where we not only survive and just get by, but we can thrive in this space? So that's essentially the inspiration for Project Spectrum. And just to let you know what our mission statement is, it's in 2 parts. The first is to shift the large-scale culture of music academia in the US and Canada toward equity by confronting racism, sexism, ableism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, settler colonialism, and other forms of discrimination and injustice. And then the second part is to bolster community, share resources, and hold space for those academics who are marginalized by the academy. And so the themes of our events will change from year to year or whenever we hold them, but that's essentially the goal that we're working toward through our various initiatives. So yeah, that's Project Spectrum more or less.
That's amazing, Clifton. And just a quick question before we get to the how for you know, talking about all of this is that your first symposium was about pipeline. Your second symposium was about coalition. What's the next symposium theme? What comes after pipeline and coalition?
I mean, that is a great question. We're still thinking about it. We just had a meeting like yesterday, if not 2 days ago, and we were talking about thinking about more of like the international context, because at least for academia, it's very easy to be very US centric, very US and Canada centric. And, you know, we're kind of thinking about how can we interact more with countries outside of North America, outside of the Americas, more with the global South, because there's a lot of like feeling like those scholars need to interact with us, but not feeling like we need to interact with them. So we're thinking about how we can promote this idea of like, we're all scholars in different playing fields, and we all have experiences that are worthwhile to be shared and discussed and thought about critically. So that, you know, we may not do that, but that's one of the ideas that we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the things that's incubating.
Mhm.
So I'm hearing a theme, right? So Clifton, for you, it was being at that AMA conference and looking around the room and being like, something's wrong. Like we need to fix this, right? For
Mhm.
Samantha, it was a moment where you didn't feel like you could bring your authenticity as a Black woman artist into the field that you had chosen, and you wanted to make that possible for yourself and for other people, right? And Ian, you know, you were a bass player, and you know, you had a moment also where you said, I want to be involved in something that is going to pass on activism to the next generation. So you have this moment, you have this idea, you have this theory of change. How? What's the first step that you took? And let's talk about that first. Like, what was the first step that you took to take this idea into something concrete and actionable? And then what was the first big challenge that you faced as you started to get into it, really get into the weeds? Ian, I'm going to start with you. And we're now in the open part of the session where you all should feel free to interrupt each other.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would say that, as you can hear with Clifton and Samantha, that, you know, those experiences of realizing I have to sort of compartmentalize like part of myself and I can't be authentic here, or what does this mean by just me being here? These aren't necessarily esoteric to an individual, right? And I say that to put that out in the universe because there might be a lot of young artists now who might feel that to a degree. Like, is this just me? And so when thinking about these things that you want to do, I would say the very first thing, one thing that I always sort of relied on, is the resources around you. I know that particularly with Sphinx, you have an incredible network that you can rely on. I remember feeling younger, being the only one, and then you sort of realize like, okay, these are other people I can work with, and they're also brilliant. So in every stage of your plan, which when I mean by stage of your plan is planning, drafting, for the sake of like a performance or something like that, curating, programming, you know, performing or something like that, there are experts at every level that you can find at Sphinx to sort of help you walk through each one of those things. The other thing that I think is really essential, that's really great to work on, is just uh, writing down and having a sense of clarity how exactly you want to you know, go with those things. That's really important. One, because if there is, I don't want to say necessarily a disagreement, but there will be questions to figure out and obstacles to figure out, like exactly what is it that you want to do, how do you want to do these things, and to have a sense of clarity and being clear about each step of that process is going to be integral. And then the other thing that I sort of mentioned before is just having flexibility to make adjustments as well when you put a sort of plan into action. Being able to adjust, not being so rigid. You want to adhere to proximal goals that lead to things as well, but you want to have some adjustment. In a very weird sort of way, is like practicing to a degree, not completely, but is, you know, setting the goal and doing things that way. And if it's particularly something that involves being, you know, in the community or something like that, then the next thing you have to do is just being present, being open to that in the first place, to learn, and in order to develop goals and programs in conjunction with other people, if that's something more along the lines of what you want to do. So those would be my tips for how you can start getting things off the ground.
Wow, that's a tip-packed statement, Ian. That's amazing. So many concrete things, like find advice through your networks, write it down, and be flexible. I love that so much. Samantha, when you started Black Stages, did you write it down first? Did you follow that advice?
No.
No, you just
Black
did it.
Stage- No, I always say we made Black Stage happen on a whole of sleep deprivation and righteous indignation. We learned everything on the fly, and it's not maybe how I would recommend the first one. But as I've gone on, my advice would be to make sure to define success for yourself. I think that that is such a powerful thing. And when you put clarity around that, it makes decision making so much easier. It's very easy to say, this is what I'm interested in because it aligns with what I just said. Success is going to be for me, versus kind of getting coerced into things that other people tell you should be concerned with. I also have had some incredible teachers who forced me to write a manifesto. Like, who do I want to be as an artist? And that was such a powerful document to start using as in parts of my bio. And suddenly it was like, wow, well, if my bio is saying that I care about all these things, am I doing things that align with all of these things? And so that was really helpful. And then lastly, ask questions of your teachers. I think that, like, particularly like often I felt often in Black culture, there's this idea that, like, you really, in order to respect authority, you nod and say yes. Like, whether you understand, whether you don't. Like, I definitely felt a lot of that, and it took me a very long time to get to the point where I could actually ask questions, dig in, say when something didn't make sense to me, and I wish I could have done that sooner.
Ask the hard questions, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Could I speak to that? So Samantha mentioned the manifesto, and the reason why I think that's so important is a matter of clarity, because sometimes as an artist of color, you feel like, if not me, then who? You feel like you got to take on everything, which you can't do, right? The manifesto helps with clarity to determine, is this my work to do, and can I do it, right? And it also helps with, what? I don't have a strong enough sense of like what I can do with theory, but I know who does. And so, then you can go out to Clifton. Once again, it's that partnership. You don't have to tackle on this multifaceted thing by yourself. Having the manifesto really helps you direct your energies and talents, the things that you do best, into being effective in the first place.
Yeah. I'm sensing a theme also from your advice, is that on the one hand, as an individual, you all felt this urge to be responsible, right, for your futures and the futures of others. But there's collective wisdom and effort that means that you don't have to do it alone, right? So there's individual responsibility, but there's collective action, which I think is a very powerful point. Clifton, when you started Project Spectrum, can you tell us a little bit about maybe some bumps along the road as getting it started, and kind of how you swatted those out of the way?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely talk about that. I mean, one thing that I was thinking about just while listening was, because I think there's a lot of things that help like one get a project off the ground, but like I think like step zero is even like believing that you can do it. Like I think at least in the academic context, it's pretty rare for graduate students to put on conferences, much less like really big ones. And I was like going into my second year of grad school, and I was like, can I do, like, someone mentioned the idea to me, and I was like, can I do that? And it's like I sat on it for several months before I even did it. But then even like thinking about like my life and my career as a whole, I think like just having the confidence to like apply for this or to make this happen, like I think that's half of like the reason that I have half of the success that I do today. Beyond that, this is, so I'll answer the question a little bit differently about the hurdles. I think when I was hearing about the manifesto, that got me thinking about writing, because this is a tip and it's a potential hurdle. And I think like as someone who thinks about grant applications and that kind of stuff a lot, I see people like potentially trip up on this. Being able to write well, I think I say this because I'm an academic, but I think it's true in just about any context. Being able to write well is very, very important, because if you can't describe your ideal well or communicate it well to other people, they will be less likely to invest in your project financially or otherwise. So I think that's a really important skill that you want to look into, like, learning from mentors. We've talked about this, like collective wisdom. You can go to your university's writing center, there's books on it, like, but that's a skill that I would say is worthwhile investing in. And regarding obstacles, thankfully Sphinx was really kind to support us for both our 2018 and 2020 symposia. But rejections are really like they're a part of the process, you know, whether it be a grant application, whether it be inviting potential speakers or wanting people to join your team. And you know, it's somewhat obvious advice, I think, but having like a plan B, having a plan C, you can't let things slow you down too much. Like if you need to rework your budget, so be it. But like, you know, you shouldn't like put all your eggs in one basket. You know, like if you don't get this one grant, then it doesn't mean that the whole project should fall apart. So yeah, those are just a few ideas. I'm sure we'll get into more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially during this time of uncertainty for our field and for our world and for our country for many reasons, um, I think that you can get paralyzed into not making a plan because there are so many factors going on, right? But I think that the successful people that I've seen, you make a plan and you have a backup plan and you have a backup plan to that and you are flexible. I think Ian, you were the one who said, or Samantha, you said, you know, flexible to adjust as you go. Oh, Ian said that. Yeah. Yeah. So collective wisdom. Yeah. We should turn to questions. I can't believe we're already at that section. The time has already flown by. So I'm going to take question one, and it is a tough, good one. I'm an undergraduate student leader. How do you all go about speaking authentically and unabashedly without fear of retribution? And I will kind of add a coda to that. See what I did there. I will add a coda question to that, which is like, you know, in your experience on a scale from 0 to 10, you know, like 10 being really aggressive and 1 being kind of like go with the flow and within the system, like where have you found yourself needing to be in order to affect the change that you want to do? So how do you speak authentically without fear of retribution, and how aggressive do change agents need to be? Anyone can go.
Well,
Ian,
I can
thoughts?
tackle it
Yeah.
first. First and foremost, I want to say that if we have any educators out there, senior staff, to please note those questions. And once again, that these experiences aren't esoteric. It's a real concern that you have. So for me, as undergrad, it took a long time to feel like I could unabashedly speak without fear and retribution. Particularly, I experienced something that maybe a lot of people do, which is, you find yourself on posters, right? You find yourself on posters, and next thing you know, is like, why am I on these posters? It's like there's a bunch of black people here, but it's not. It's just me from the front, me from the side, and me from the back. Right? So, there's obvious for the institution that is saying that they value that diversity, where the what I took me a long time to realize, and I have to admit I didn't realize it as an undergrad, was just that I had value, and I didn't want that value to just be placed on my appearance and body. So as far as being aggressive, I just started to leverage that, which is like, look, if you're going to put me on these posters, then I think it behooves you to actually like listen to what I have to say, how I feel about these posters, how I might feel about this experience being here. And by sort of leveraging that value that it took me a long time to realize I had, um, that gave me a little bit more confidence to feel like I could say what I wanted to say.
That's really great, Ian. I think that we all don't realize sometimes the leverage that we have in these institutions. We underestimate our own leverage, and you need to lean into it and really work it, right? Yeah. Clifton or Samantha?
Oh,
Yeah, go
Samantha,
ahead,
go ahead.
Samantha.
Okay, sorry, I was just gonna go off of this idea of leverage. I think absolutely that is right. And I think particularly right now, this is the time, right? Almost all institutions have published some sort of statement around allyship. And regardless of how much you think that might be just lip service or that they actually mean it, I always find, as like a true nerd and someone who's often scared of just putting my full stuff out there, if you start off with you recently posted this statement around this and the other, and this isn't actually in line with that. How can we talk about that? You know, people are they're going to have to talk to you about it. And I think that as long, you know, not that it's always ideal, but if you're grounding it in the way academics are talking about it, if you're grounding it in this terminology, it is a lot easier to get your voice heard. I also do think though that I'm maybe lean a lot more towards bringing everyone a few steps forward together versus like maybe a more radical separationist edge. And so I do think maybe those are two different, it depends on really what you're trying to share, because I'm sure there's certain things that regardless of how you phrase it, people are going to be a little upset about. So I don't know if I can speak to that part as much.
Yeah. Clifton, do you want to add anything?
Yes. So going on, well, there's a few ideas I have. First would be, I think that there's power in numbers. You know, like if there's a difference between like speaking out authentically as yourself and kind of saying like, hey, we're a collective of people and we have these thoughts. It's a lot harder for there to be retribution if it's kind of like against an entire group of people. I really like Samantha's idea of like calling out the details, citing the numbers, like the statistics, etc., because it's just like facts. It's not like it's an opinion that you're in, and also saying like, oh, like you said you care about this, but then that doesn't match with that. Can just ask like an honest question. Can you talk me through this? You know, like maybe not being super accusatory, but just saying like, can you tell me what's up? And I don't know. I mean, like, I think it's worth thinking about what you are willing to risk, you know, like, are you afraid of like, you know, this is very extreme. Are you afraid of like being kicked out of school, or are you afraid of like a professor like being mean to you sometimes? You know, like there are different risks, and I think it's worthwhile thinking about what you're willing to risk. But also, like in my experience, like 3 years ago, like before Project Spectrum had started, you know, I wasn't known for this work, but now today, you know, people more or less respect what I have to say related to these issues just because they associate me with the project and the work that I've done. So, you know, the more you speak authentically and unabashedly, the more people will just like kind of be forced to listen to what you have to say. So, you know, it kind of like you build a reputation. I think that's an important way of thinking about it.
Yeah. I like what you say about assessing risk, Clifton. You know, we're talking a lot during this pandemic about your risk budget, right? Like I'm willing to spend this amount of risk by going out to eat because I really, you know, am dying for some Thai food, or, you know, I'm willing to risk this much to, you know, go be with my grandma who I really, really need to see, right? So I think maybe like at least conceptually thinking about a risk budget in a way, if you're going to be engaged in activist work, because let's be real, you know, there is risk, you know, in speaking up and challenging the status quo, and we shouldn't minimize that, but it's a question of assessing risk and being strategic about where you use it, right? Yeah. The next question comes from a young arts administrator, and it's sort of similar to the first question. So I just wonder if there are any further thoughts about struggling to feel like senior colleagues take their suggestions for embracing change seriously, right? So not being taken seriously by elders. And I think a lot of the things that we talked about here about taking risk and about basing it in stated goals of the institution and about asking the why. But is there anything else about approaching, you know, more senior colleagues that you would give tips to the listeners about? Samantha, do you, Clifton, you go first.
Yeah, I'll just go briefly. I think that at least in my experience, you know, it depends on institution per institution. So I think it seems like this person, they're at a place where a lot of the senior colleagues are not really on board, but you should be able to find someone at some place who has like a similar rank who is on board with what you're saying, and they can give you advice about if they were at your institution, what they would do to get things moving. Like it's not going to remove the conflict, but it would at least make it so that your efforts to like dismantle whatever system you're looking to dismantle are more effective, because you can still get that wisdom even if it's not from within that particular space, I think.
That's great advice. Do either Samantha, Ian, anything to add there? Shall we move on? Yeah, I think this is Ian, where you spoke about finding allies and finding collective action, right? And availing yourself of networks to help you. You know, you don't have to do it alone. I think is one of the answers to many of these questions. It's like you can find help, you can find support, you can find advice, right?
Absolutely.
So this question came up actually yesterday in the session with all of the conservatory leaders in a panel discussion that Aaron Dworkin led, which is what strategies can musicians use to counteract hostility from other musicians, professors when choosing to perform non-standard repertoire by composers of color. So, you know, I don't think we need to explain that question. No, you should be playing Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, and you know that's how you're going to win your audition, and that's the core repertoire. And you bring in something, and you say, "But I want to play this." How do we deal with that? It's a tough situation.
Yeah. Does anyone want to go first? I don't.
I mean,
Ian, you go ahead.
Oh,
Oh no, go ahead.
I'll go very briefly. I have less at stake since I'm not a performer, perhaps, but I would say, just like it's at the end of the day, it's you doing your thing. You know, like people can give you opinions, but I think it's important to do what is meaningful to you. You know, like sometimes people talk about like switching studio teachers if like someone's really just not aligned with you. But you know, whoever is telling you that you need to do whatever they say you need to do, they're not going to be in your life forever. And so like again, it's the risk assessment, I think. Like if it's going to be something that like is getting in the way of you graduating, then maybe like you have to do some things that you don't want to. But you know, I think at the end of the day, it might be worth standing up for what you believe in if even if like a few people don't like you. Like I don't know, like what it, you know, like what are you willing to sacrifice, and what are the goals that you have like from your art?
Yeah.
For me, I find in those situations, because I've come across those for years. It's like, oh no, we don't want to dilute the repertoire. Oh, there's no quality repertoire from so and so and so and so. Oh, what about technique and things like that? And once again, I often find in those situations, if I'm sitting there in the room and questioning why, and you know, as far as like being a human engagement, right? I'll give you a primary example. It took years for me to gain the confidence to play Amazing Grace on a recital, right? Like I grew up in the church. I played Amazing Grace, and I always kind of left it at the church until one day I played it in a master class, and I got eviscerated, you know, for playing Amazing Grace in a master class. Didn't do it for a long time. And it took forever for me to, in order to feel like I had enough confidence to put it on the same program as something else. And oftentimes when I'm working with people and they're saying like, well, you know, we don't want to program these things. It's just like, why do we exist in a world where why do we have to segregate our audience? Like, why on the same program as Mozart can you not hear Amazing Grace? Why on the same program as Bach can you not hear Kirk Franklin? Why on the same program as this? Why am I going to actually deliberately segregate, you know, the audience from listening to these things? In our daily lives, we're pretty eclectic anyways. So why am I just trying to curate this experience, this interaction, this human engagement with you to only represent a few sort of things at this particular moment? So once again, you're at a music institute to try to find ways to engage individuals to have an experience, right? And ultimately, all of this technique and repertoire that they're teaching you is to be a part of that. And so, as Clifton said, a little bit comes with standing up for yourself. I think the question that you have to ask your teacher, your colleagues, is like, what are you against me conveying to other individuals, and why can't I just expand on those experiences? Why do I have to just you know, just do these things? Once again, it's not, well, not trying to take away that space. If you want to play Mozart, that's great. I like Mozart too, but there's space for Price, and there's space for Higdon, and there's space for all these individuals that way. So it's a constant battle. It's at times, I admit, it feels Sisyphean. I think I messed that word up. There you go. but it's always bringing the people who are opposed to that back around to this idea of just like, we're talking about connecting with people, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a cliche, I guess, to say, this question of yes and, right? But I think what I'm hearing you say, Ian, is like, we're not trying to say that's not important, the stuff that you think that I should do, my teacher thinks I should do, but I want to do this too, because
Absolutely.
it's important. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And by
And I
the
think
way, it's okay to say I'm not interested in that also, if that's authentically how you feel.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think part of that goes into like how you present yourself to your teacher. I think at the end of the day, if you can say to your teacher, this is the type of artist I want to be, and this is what success means to me. I don't want to sing at the Met. I mean, not that you can't sing at the Met. I want to sing works by BIPOC artists. But if you're interested in a different thing and you say what you're identifying success as, or what I need to do is not actually identify success, this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to get there. I just think a teacher would be pretty hard pressed to still try to fight you on it that way. I think part of why this question is so hard, though, is that at a lot of institutions, it's like curricular, right? Like it's on a larger level that you have to perform certain languages, certain,
Repertoire.
stipulations. And right. And so I guess part of that one I would say is like make sure that you are doing as much research as you can. And as a vocalist, sometimes I like first would assume that the only music by African American artists would be in English. But like if you really do some research and you talk to specialists, you can find plenty of songs that are within different languages, within different repertoires that might fit into your requirements. But also, I've personally found that new music is a great way to get around curricular limitations. That if you take the initiative to commission something, or if you talk to new composers, it is still classical. It can be within certain themes and be about or be by artists who you're excited to talk about and be about more diverse subjects. So I think it takes more initiative sometimes, but that might be what you have to do if you're not ready to go head to head with it.
Yeah.
A
Go ahead,
small thing
Clifton.
to add to that is just, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of these situations I can be very stubborn, but like there's power in writing letters about things. There's power in like petitions. Like, like if you find that your curriculum is not serving you in the way that it's serving you want it to, or that it should, it's not really going to change unless someone puts pressure on it, and that person could be you. So.
That's something that's come through loud and clear in the last hours. There's power in numbers, there's power in groups, and you don't have to do it by yourself, right? If you have an idea or there's change that you want to see. Y'all, I can't believe it. It's 3:17. We have 3 minutes left, and I just want to say very much thank you. And in the time that we have remaining, and I apologize to the other excellent questions that we haven't gotten to yet, I wonder if you could just give us a parting shot on whatever topic that you want, and just a parting thought as we send people inspired out into the world to affect change in the world and in their lives and in their artistry. Samantha, I'm going to put that to you first. Parting shot.
Oh, the pressure. Okay. My parting shot would be to do the change internally first. If there's something you really want to see out in the world, make sure that you can articulate it yourself, that you've done some research, and that you feel confident in writing about it and saying it. I think that's the biggest step, and it gives you the confidence you need to share that with other people.
Absolutely. Clifton.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to summarize just my ethos with this, it's be organized, choose your team wisely, like seek out help, and just like do it, get it done, because that's half the reason that people don't do things. They just stop. If you don't stop, it'll happen eventually.
Nice. Ian.
I echo all of those sentiments. If you have a plan, sit down, think about it, articulate it, write it out. And the very important aspect, don't forget your resources as well. And for those out there, if to practice what I preach, if there's any way I can help, you can find me. Go to the Longy website.
Awesome. It's an honor to be with the three of you. And if the future is in hands of people like you, I'm very optimistic. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of us. Thank you to all of you who tuned in today to hear these three amazing individuals about the work that they're doing and their advice on how to do it. Thanks, everyone.